This is a Rough Tiger production.
And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Moses supposes what?
His toes are roses, but Moses
Oh.
supposes erroneously. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dream Idiots. There's
Hey.
a long contention as to whether or not the subjects of this show are the idiots or it's your hosts. And I think by now, 109 episodes in, it's us. It's the hosts. My name is Morris, and the other fellow there is Bryan.
Howdy, howdy. Have we ever actually explained, or have we kept a secret this whole time where the name came from?
I don't know if we've ever explained it.
Yeah, let's keep it a secret for now. But
Okay, that's fine.
one day we may have to divulge that. But it is
Yes.
clear. It is clear that this is the Dream Idiots podcast, and we are the idiots. That's definitive at this point. We do appreciate you
Yes.
listening, tagging along, and listening to our stuff. Gotten some good feedback on the last two or three. Some
Yes,
folks
we
reached
have.
out. Some folks have reached out that were kind of circling back to us for the first time in a while, and like some of our more recent offerings. So appreciate some positive feedback. If on whichever platform you're listening to us on, Apple or Audible or Spotify, if you can shoot us 5 stars, that helps us somehow. We don't really know why or how. Shooting us a review would be helpful as well. You can find us on Instagram at Dream Idiots, Facebook at Dream Idiots. Drop us a line at dreamidiotspodcast@gmail.com, and you can check out dreamidiots.com. We appreciate everything you're doing for us.
Yeah, we got feedback from Steve and Marvin and Peter up here in Colorado who enjoyed the Kennedy Call Your Brothers episode recently,
Excellent.
which was I think was our last episode. So thanks for letting us know via email, and we'll keep doing our best here. And we do not have any announcements other than that, correct, Bryan? We are good.
We do not. We are still now. We are now on 101.5 in San Antonio. You can listen to that online Tuesdays and Fridays at 5 p.m. The folks over at Powerhouse take our content and edit it down and put it on the radio. But you can listen to that simulcast if you want to download their app as well. So it's very, very cool that they decided to reuse our stuff and get it out there times 2.
Yes, absolutely. And we've got an all Texas episode here today, but it's interesting for you non-Texans. So, Bryan, you get started for us in episode 109. What you got for us this week?
All right. Well, this episode is dropping on March 5th, March 6th. As you know, as a Texan, as a San Antonian, time for the Alamo. We have discussed the Alamo and the history of Texas and race relations in the context of the Civil War and in other contexts as well. But I want to dive back around, bring up the topic of the Alamo yet again. Even though this is sort of a treasure trove topic where you could, whole podcast series could be done and probably should be done on the myriad of topics that have been, peeled away related to the history of Texas, etc. And I have to apologize if some of this might be a repeat. We've done enough episodes of this podcast now where some of these things, some of these details are hard to bring back up. But I think we've discussed a book that came out in the recent past called "Forget the Alamo." You and I went through the process of learning that the Alamo was this heroic battle for Texas independence. And obviously, the Battle of the Alamo and Texas independence and Texas history, like any story from history, is much more complex and nuanced than any one sort of children's tale is. And so, during as I was kind of diving back into the story of the Alamo over sort of the last year, came across a couple other individuals that, in the context of Texas, I think are just worth knowing about, because if you went through Texas history like you and I did, you learn about Davy Crockett and Shibui and Travis and Stephen F. Austin, but there are a whole host of folks that are Tejano or Black or, you know, from all over the world that were in Texas at the time, and their stories are important and necessary to learn about as well. We're going to talk about a man named Toribio Lozoya. So, proof of proof are needed that Spanish names are the best names. Toribio, Toribio. Just love that name.
I do too.
Lozoya was born in San Antonio, actually at the Alamo, 11th of April, 1808. His parents were Ventura Lozoya and Concepcion de los Angeles Chalet. They lived in a little stone house, two-room stone house that had been a Alamo Indian dwelling previous to that. He had a brother and a sister, and they all lived in this home somewhere near the southwest corner of the compound that was the mission at the time. So if you can picture the Alamo, so Alamo Street is directly in front of the Alamo Plaza, that is, and the next road over to the west is actually Lozoya. Lozoya going north turns into Broadway, but Lozoya, that road there, was named for Toribio. I'm assuming that the west wall I know that the famous facade of the Alamo that we can all recognize was actually internal and faced into the plaza, the courtyard. And so the west wall was out in front of that at some distance. I don't know if it was as far as where Lozoya Street is now. That seems like a heck of a long way, but I guess it could have been. Lozoya marries Concepcion Cubier, and they have three children together. And he decides to follow in his father and his grandfather's footsteps, and he joins the military. He's a private in at the time the Mexican Army, serving at the Alamo with the Second Flying Company of San Carlos de Parras. And in 1830, his company is actually sent off, and they build a fort so it's called Fort Tenochtitlan. It's actually an Aztec word. Tenochtitlan was built on the west bank of the Brazos River in what is now Burleson County. So up kind of close to College Station area, a little bit sort of south and west of Bryan College Station, 100 miles above San Felipe. So Lozoya and his whole family were stationed at the fort until September of 1832. And the fort is established there basically, I mean, the Mexican government, Mexican military is trying to stymie intrusions by Anglos. They want this area to stay Mexican, stay Latino infused, and all these white people are coming in. But that as a fortress falls apart quickly because Stephen F. Austin and others have already written and gotten permission from the Mexican government to have possessions and have land in the area. So it's all sort of for naught. And it seems clear that Lozoya's allegiance is really, he's obviously, he is Tejano, but his allegiance is to Texas and to San Antonio. So basically he didn't like the fact that the Mexican government at the time was very centralist. Texas, at least in his mind, was viewed very much as an outback that had resources and had things you could use and abuse, but it wasn't really critical. It wasn't really important. It was sort of kind of a bit of an afterthought. And to the average Mexican, Mexico was about Central Mexico, Mexico City, and accumulating wealth and power there. And so, at least in his mind, in Toribio's mind, in the minds of other men at the time who identified as Tejano, their allegiance was much more Texas centric, not Mexican centric. So this fort fails in its mission, and he returns shortly thereafter to San Antonio. Late 1835, he's had enough. He decides to desert the Mexican army, and he joins Juan Seguin's company of Tejanos, and they're engaged in pretty consistent, not full conflict, but the siege of Bear goes on for many months. And it's sort of hand to hand, house to house fighting going on between a variety of people with sort of disparate interests. So but he was very much on the side of Texas and Texas independence. So the story of Santa Anna and the Alamo is a story that's now committed to our DNA. Santa Anna comes back into San Antonio, lays siege to the Alamo in 1836. Lozoya is there. He and his entire family enter the Alamo grounds for safety. Lozoya and 15 other of Juan Seguin's men stay behind as Seguin rides to the east to hopefully try to track down reinforcements. Lozoya's mother and 3 children remained in the mission during the whole siege, but in the Battle of the Alamo, Toribio Lozoya is killed on March 6th. His body is discovered by his superior, Francisco Ruiz, in the chapel and is burnt on the pyres along with all the other defenders of the Alamo. His mother, Concepcion Lozoya, his brother and his sister were all spared. They're on the list of official non-combatant survivors of the Battle of the Alamo. And I mean, in my mind, still very much a person from history that is worth knowing about. On April 15th of last year, 2023, there was a second annual Toribio Lozoya Day held in San Antonio. His ancestors, and I love the fact that there are ancestors in San Antonio who can track their lineage back this far. I mean, that's a hell. I mean, it's just 200 years. I can't do that with my family, but his ancestors laid 27 flowers in his honor on the grounds of the Alamo. Um, you know, I have to assume that a Mexican living in Texas who was fighting, I mean, a large part of this conflict and later then of Texas's involvement in the Confederacy had to do with race. So slavery is a thing in Texas now. And so if you're Latino or Tejano, I don't really know what your views are on race or on slavery. And it seems like your motivations must be a bit at cross purposes, but it's clear that he loved his home enough to fight for it. And he is in my mind sort of the classic example of a lesser known figure who is intentionally actively de-emphasized in early academics in the 70s and 80s when we grew up, because again we learned about David Crockett and Jim Bowie and all the white guys who died. But here's a man who was loyal and was working to protect his family and protect his home and died in the battle. There is actually a life-size statue of Lozoya that stands on Lozoya Street, right downtown adjacent to the Alamo. And the Alamo's west wall, I need to dig into this a little more, was actually excavated at one point in the late 70s in order to try to further identify exactly where Lozoya's home was. And so apparently they did find it, and there is photographic evidence of where it was. I don't know what stands on that location now, but Toribio Lozoya is one of the unheralded, unknown heroes from the Alamo. There's a second person I was going to mention as well, who I discovered the last time I actually went through the Alamo, which was probably almost exactly 10 years ago, 10 or 11 years ago. We're going to talk briefly about a woman named Emily D. West. Does that name ring a bell at all?
I've heard it, but I can't place it off the top of my head.
Okay. So West was a free woman, but a free woman of color. And I hate these terms nearly as much as I hate the N-word, but she was referred to as a high yellow, or a woman of color who could pass for white. It's just like the term mulatto, which I also just makes my skin crawl. And so I feel bad even saying these words, but she was actually born in New Haven, Connecticut in 1815. By 1835, however, she had been contracted out to a man named James Morgan in New York, and she agreed to work as an indentured servant for him in Morgan's Point, Texas. Morgan's Point, Texas is basically on now what is now the ship channel between Galveston and Houston, and she's just working as a housekeeper in a hotel there.
Charming place.
Yeah, it was awful. I'm sure awful then. It's terrible now. If you've ever been to Texas City, an awful place. So she'd been there for a few months. April 16th, 1836. West and several other folks in the area wound up being kidnapped by the Mexican cavalry, and West is forced to travel with these forces with Santa Anna's army as they're prepping to face Sam Houston, and she was in the camp at the Battle of San Jacinto on the Mexican side when Houston's force attacks, and so the legend is, and who knows what the truth is, the legend is that Santa was not prepared for battle because basically he was having sex with West. Obviously, this is a sexual assault. This is a rape. This is something awful. If this story is even remotely true, this is awful, and Santa Anna is a absolute dirtbag. There's no real contemporary account from the time that indicated this is true, but the story is recorded by an Englishman, a guy named William Bollert, several years later, and it's passed around as true. The story gets passed by Sam Houston later on. It's published in a diary all the way not until the 1950s, and amateur historians start kind of digging into the tale to figure out whether it's legit or not. But she winds up being the inspiration, allegedly, of the song "The Yellow Rose of Texas" because she's a woman of color who can, quote, pass for white. I mean, disgusting and bizarre and hateful in like a myriad of levels. But there are at least one historian questions the reliability of the tale completely. Because apparently Santa Anna had a huge aversion to the intermingling of races because he was he was a racist, even though Mexico was against slavery. He was still racist. And so this historian says, well, like that couldn't be the case because he wanted Mexican blood to stay pure. So who knows where the story even came from or how it evolved over time. But after the Battle of San Jacinto, the real Emily West decides she wants to leave Texas. But in all the insanity, her papers indicate she is a free woman or lost. She does manage to get some help from a military commandant in Galveston who vouches for her, says she's in fact a free woman, and she is then able to leave and go back to New York in March of 1837. So she's alternately referred to as Emily West and Emily Morgan because the guy who she was indentured to was his last name was Morgan, and the practice at the time was slaves and indentured servants adopted the last name of their scumbag owner. So that's the genesis of her name. There's also some confusion. There was another woman who came through the area named Emily West de Zavala. She had been married to a man named Lorenzo de Zavala, who was vice president of the Republic. So she was in the area at the same time. There's at least one historian that suggests that there aren't two women named Emily West. There's just one, and there's been some confusion. And so there's no real evidence to support one argument or the other. It seems likely that Emily D. West and Emily de Zavala were not the same person, but it's hard to know. Nevertheless, the Emily Morgan Hotel, which sits immediately adjacent to
that was my next question.
Yeah, sits next to the Alamo on the north side. So last time I did the tour of the Alamo was with a small group of folks. We went and had lunch and hung out in the Emily Morgan Hotel, and I was looking at pictures of like, wait, who's this? And so again, is she a hero? Is she probably? I mean, if this is even tangent to true, she's certainly the victim of some awful sexual assault. But she does live a long life. She passes away at the age of 76 in the North. Is the song "The Yellow Rose of Texas" about her? Who knows? But anyway, in any case, an interesting person from the folklore of Texas, Emily Morgan.
Two interesting people from the folklore and history of Texas. That's and that was a song we were taught in elementary school, Brian. I don't know if you learned it, but we had to learn to sing "The Yellow Rose of Texas."
Yep, it was required.
Yeah, that's a fascinating story two fascinating stories from that period of time in Texas history, and just the Alamo is such a crossroads of race and gender and
Right.
politics
Absolutely.
and religion. It's one of the reasons I find it so fascinating.
Yeah.
And you were absolutely right. I believe it was the Mexican Constitution of 1824 that made slavery illegal in Mexico. So
And
it,
yes, yeah,
yeah,
in that window of time. So right beforehand. So if you're, I mean, again,
yeah,
we talked about this in episode 15 when you did Defenders of the Alamo, and then again in Jean Charles Houzeau, the whole issue
yeah,
of I would love to have an understanding of what it's like, or what would have been like if you were living in this part of the world and you had skin that was somewhere in the middle, right? Where did your allegiances lie? How did you prove who you were? How did you prove what your rights were? Because there you had white racist scum who I feel confident if they ran stumble across a person that had kind of dark skin, were they instantly victimized? Were they instantly enslaved? How did you prove who you were? How did you how did you make decisions about who was in your corner? Who were you loyal to? Emily Morgan's a black woman in Texas who rightfully flees, but she's in Texas during the period of slavery. What's that like? I don't know. So interesting questions that we will I will certainly probably never understand, but they're worth discussing.
absolutely. And another good story from you, Brian. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought about those two folks, and I've been thinking about the Alamo for a long time myself. Great stories. And how many
thank
more
you.
of those are out there in Alamo land that we
Oh,
haven't heard?
right. Yeah.
Tons.
All right. Hundreds.
Do we have a naughty word of the week, Brian?
It's time for the Dream Idiot's curse word of the week.
Yeah, it's not very naughty, and so curse word of the week. May have experienced this back in your days of academia. The term gentleman's B, a gentleman's B. Ever heard that term
As in just the letter B?
as the grade?
I'm guessing it's I'm guessing it's a grade you give someone when they probably didn't deserve it, but it's enough to let them pass the class.
More or
That's
less.
just a guess. Okay.
It's a hey, Dr. Franklin, I had a really good grade in your class, and finals are kicking my ass, and I really don't want to have to have 3 days of sleepless nights prepping for the final. Can you just give me a B? So the gentleman's B is if a prof says, okay, yeah, you know this, you know your stuff, you're good. There was definitely one occasion when I was an undergrad where I had to do a final project, and I won't tell I will not mention the prof's name, but I was within earshot of him when a very attractive, cute, you know, compatriot, contemporary of mine walked up to him and said, "Hi, I was wondering if I can I just not do a final project? No, that's fine. You're good. I know. Yeah, that's fine. I'll average you out, and and so gave her what she wanted, and then turned around and was face to face with me, and I said, okay, that same deal is good for me too, right? And he goes, yes, it is. And I think I got actually better than I think it was either a A minus or a B plus. Like, awesome. The gentleman's B.
Professor Franklin didn't play that.
No?
No, I did not. I did not. Um, the gentleman's bee. That is a new one for me, Brian.
Yeah,
I
there you
had
go.
never heard that. That's
So not that naughty.
not that naughty. Um, I always tell my students it's better to earn your own D than cheat and get an A, but a lot of them didn't believe me. So, Brian, I have a story for you this week that is also Texas centric. There's a Texas Monthly article that I owe a great deal of information to, and I'll discuss that in a moment. The 40-year-old article from Texas Monthly. And thanks to Marvin down in San Antonio for suggesting this topic a while back. I'm just now getting around to it. Let's get started. You ever heard of a fellow by the name of John Russell Crouch?
John
Wow.
Russell Crouch. John Russell Crouch.
Well, he was born in Hondo, Texas
Yeah. Yes, I was going to say Hondo Crouch.
on December
Right.
4th, 1916. His parents, Harry and Ione Crouch, already had an 8-year-old daughter named Mary. The Crouches had followed Harry's occupation with the Southern Pacific Railroad from Illinois to South Texas, first way out in Spofford. You know where Spofford, Texas is, Bryan? I
I've
had
heard
to
of
look
it.
it up.
No, I have no idea.
It's out near Brackettville, where I spent a fair amount of time. That's where the fake Alamo is for all the movies that were shot. I had a relative who was a superintendent out there for a number of years, out near Brackettville, Del Rio area. The family eventually got moved up to Hondo, about 50 miles west of San Antonio, where young John came into the world and earned his nickname. He would forever be known as Hondo Crouch. Now, getting back to Harry Crouch, Hondo's father, he was a telegraph operator for the railroad, and he was described as a, quote, quiet, passive man with large brown eyes. He also, quote, cried easily. His wife, Ione, who went by the name Oni, ran the family, but seemed to have quite the mean streak when it came to practical jokes. Like she would sew the leg holes of kids' pajamas shut, so the kid would just spin around in circles trying to get their pajamas on. His father, however, showed young Hondo, the beauty of the natural landscape through hunting and swimming, the latter of which would become his passion. And he picked up that nickname as a kid, carried it through. The summer after high school graduation, Hondo moved to Corpus Christi and lived with his sister and her husband, which I'm sure they loved. He worked at a chemical plant for college money, and he started entering swim meets, winning 3 gold medals and qualifying for a state meet in Austin, where he placed first, second, and third. His outing impressed the UT swim coach named Tex Robertson and earned him college admittance and a place on the swim team. Robertson also dubbed him with a new nickname, Hondo the Swimming Cowboy. His junior year, Hondo's father committed suicide. His boss had died in a hospital in San Antonio, and he just couldn't handle it knowing that he'd lost his job, so he shot himself in the chest with a rifle. It took him 2 tries to kill himself.
Ew.
Yes, the effects of this upon Hondo were virtually unknown to those around him. He didn't seem to get close to anyone. He told no one of his father's death, quietly borrowed a car from the coach, and drove home for the funeral. A second blow came later, in 1939, just when things were looking great for a possible trip to the 1940 Olympics in Finland. Hondo has been named an All-American swimmer, holder of records in the 50 and 100-meter freestyles. He was captain of the UT swim team, but he suffered a career-ending shoulder separation during a water polo game. So his swimming career was over. The 1940 Olympics would be canceled, not because of Hondo, but because of Hitler. After graduation from UT in 1941 with a degree in physical education, he kicked around a bit, working at a boys' camp on the Guadalupe, and then catering to rich families in Houston's River Oaks neighborhood through a boys' club, teaching swimming and serving as a father figure to the sons of Houston's elite. So daddy's too busy doing his business stuff, so Hondo would come by, pick the boys up, take them down to a swimming pool or a creek and teach them how to swim. That's what he was doing. And for those of you not from Texas or the Houston areas, River Oaks is the rich part of Houston.
Right. Yeah.
About this time, Hondo met a young lady who would be a part of his life for over 30 years. Her name was Helen Ruth Steiler, known to her family as Schatzi, which is the German word for sweetheart or dear heart. She had boarded at St. Mary's Hall in San Antonio. She attended UT, and with her looks, personality, and elegant manners, was considered and this is not me, this is the Times, quote, the prize of the hill country. Her father was one-armed widower Adolf Steiler. And I don't think the one-armed had a reason as to why he was a widower. I don't think those things were related. He lost his arm because he hit a downed power line while trying to corral his herd of goats. He carried the nickname, the Goat King of the World. Life magazine gave him that particular nickname because he owned goat ranches throughout Texas, New Mexico, and Arkansas. Hondo and Schatzi were married to great fanfare, and Adolf threw a party to end all parties in honor of the wedded couple. Once married, they moved to San Antonio and lived on Randolph Air Force Base, where Hondo served during World War II. Now, I'm not really sure what they call Randolph Air Force Base back then.
I
Was it
know
Randolph Air Corps Base? Because the Air Force didn't come around as its own entity until 46 or 47, I think. But
I know for a period of time it was Randolph Airfield.
okay, so
No,
that's where he was stationed. No matter what, he was at Randolph. After the war, they returned to live on the Stylers' home ranch, which was a modest 5,000 acres near Fredericksburg. This thing was so big, Bryan, that it spread into 3 counties, not all at once, but it was situated such that it was
right.
located at 3 counties. Hondo worked the ranch with no particular enthusiasm, which his father-in-law didn't care for. Hondo also had duties at the family wool and mohair business in Comfort, but he had the same antipathy toward that occupation as he did ranch work. Hondo and Shotzi bought 2,000 acres of their own, worked them, and raised their children. Daughter Becky, the eldest, followed by the middle sons, Juan and Carrie, and then the youngest daughter, Chris. The family seemed more erudite than their neighbors, attending functions in San Antonio museums and down at the YMCA. They didn't own a television set for many years, preferring to hone crafting skills like woodworking and wool spinning. Hondo picked up the practical joke habit from his mother and inflicted them upon his children, once covering Becky's hands in molasses and then giving her a feather to play with. Hondo wrote a column for the Comfort News under a great nom de plume. His writing name, Bryan, was Peter Cedar Stacker. And that sounds like it came, that's like right out of a Preston Sturges movie. That's up there with Miss Clockenlocker. Under the name of Peter Cedar Stacker, he made observations about the hill country life using the fictional town of Cedar Creek. He drew comparisons to Will Rogers. This imagined town was something that Hondo desperately wanted to bring to life, a simpler, gentler, less complicated time. But the times would be complicated for the Crouch family. Juan served in Vietnam, where his helicopter was shot down. He survived and returned home, but with the attendant PTSD that so many soldiers display. Younger brother Carrie had fallen into the drug culture of Austin and spent many years institutionalized. Becky and Chris both married and seemed happy, with Becky and her husband becoming born-again Christians while helping her brother Carrie through his struggles. I'm not sure to what extent Hondo was present in his adult children's lives. In that respect, Hondo had inherited his father's emotional distance. In 1971, Hondo, Shotzi, and actor Geach Cook. We've talked about a certain TV show called Carter Country that you might remember from the 70s.
Right.
Well, Geach played the dumb deputy on Carter Country. I think it lasted 2 seasons, 77, 78, somewhere in there. Hondo, Shotzi, and Geach pooled $30,000 and bought a town, Lukenbach, Texas.
Lukenbach, Texas, right.
Population somewhere between 3 and 8 people. Lukenbach had been a German settlement in the 1850s, a trading post for folks in the area. The initial plan was one of preservation, keeping the town as it was, for the locals who still used the dance hall, the general store, and the post office. But as the Crouches and Cook soon learned, the post office was scheduled for decommission. So Hondo and Geach set about attracting attention to their town as much as they could. Papers around the state had started following the Lukenbach story, so the two men sent out press releases. One, for example, claimed that the sole parking meter had been stolen. The thief thought it was a slot machine. Another told of a mailbox installation at the top of a flagpole in an attempt to get airmail. It was good-natured, folksy humor. Whatever the case, Lukenbach became a weekend spot for dances or cold beers under the trees and impromptu sing-alongs. The bar at the general store became a hub of activity for the area, and soon it attracted all types. Folks from the cities wanting to get away, college students, recovering or practicing hippies, and of course, Texas musicians. Gary P. Nunn, Guy Clark, and Jerry Jeff Walker often dropped by. Visiting with the self-declared mayor of Lukenbach, Hondo Crouch, was part of the appeal. Another part was finding it. "There's no more highway signs," Hondo said. "The youngsters have stolen the highway signs so long that the highway department just quit putting them back. So you can't find Lukenbach, and that suits me just fine. Because if you really want to come to Lukenbach, you'll find it." And he kind of nailed the whole FOMO thing decades before it was a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you really need it, you can find it. There's a real Brigadoon quality to the whole thing going on here. As half a gag, Hondo and Geach announced the first annual Luckenbach World's Fair in 1972. 9,000 cases of beer were sold because 20,000 people showed up, among them Willie Nelson. But he and Hondo never crossed paths. Hondo and Geach made lots of money on that venture. People loved the idea of finding a little out of the way place where you could be big if just for a moment. The town motto was, after all, do you remember the town motto?
Everybody's somebody, right?
Everybody's somebody in Luckenbach.
Yeah.
But for Shotzi, well, that was it. She'd had enough of Luckenbach and of Hondo. She divorced him. Hondo died in 1976 at the age of 59, but his town had become a sensation, and it was about to get bigger. April 6, 1977 would see the release of Waylon Jennings' song, Luckenbach, Texas, Back to the Basics of Love. The song, written by Chip Moman and Bobby Emmons, featured a brief guest vocal by Willie Nelson in the final refrain. The two writers and Jennings had never visited Luckenbach. Waylon was quoted as saying in his autobiography, "I knew it was a hit song, even though I didn't like it, and I still don't." It was a big hit, though. Number 1 on the U.S. Billboard Hot Country charts, number 16 on Adult Contemporary, and number 25 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was big on Canada's RPM charts, too. Number 1 on Country Tracks, number 40 on Adult Contemporary, and number 46 in the top singles. Despite all the humor and charm of the Luckenbach story, there is an undercurrent of sadness. A phrase from Matthew Monk's article I used for this piece keeps coming to mind. That Hondo became, quote, lost inside his folksy shtick. The best parallel I can think of is the great actor Peter Sellers, for whom returning to his own personality after immersing himself in a character could take some time. Perhaps Hondo never came back from the character study of a charming, small-town mayor spouting folk wisdom, spinning yarns, and pulling practical jokes. There's a happiness that comes from living inside your own conception of a perfect little town, where you're the mayor, the ringmaster of good times, of food, drink, and song. But under that, there's the reality. A Luckenbach that became, for a moment, a pop culture sensation out in the Texas Hill Country. And at the heart of that, a man who perhaps no one really knew. And that is the story, the brief story, of Hondo Crouch in Luckenbach, Texas. Sources for this were an excellent article by John Davidson from 1984 July issue of Texas Monthly, The Man Who Dreamed Up Luckenbach. Matthew Monk's June 24th, 2016 article, Hondo Crouch, The Legend of Legendary Luckenbach from TexasHillCountry.com. Gay Lewis's February 2017 article on TexasHillCountry.com, Who Was the Hill Country's Legendary Hondo Crouch? And a great documentary film. And if you're interested in some of the stories we've been telling, Free Flow Productions had this 1977 documentary called The Mayor of Luckenbach, available on texasarchives.org. So those are my main sources for this piece.
Cool. Yeah. Texas Archives is a great website. I've used it 3 or 4 times for the podcast. So yeah, great website.
Yeah. Just looking back at those old photos and old films of Texas back in the 60s and 70s and what things were like. Thanks again to Marvin from San Antonio for suggesting this, because I'd always known about Luckenbach, but
I've been there a few times.
Yeah, I went as a kid, probably not long after this stuff was big. I remember going as a kid. But the thing is, here's the secret. There's lots of little towns like that all through Texas, right? I mean, I kept thinking of Buda, just south of Austin. I mean, Buda was like this.
You have to add the Y. It's Buda. Hello.
Buda.
Dummy.
Buda, Texas, and the Salt Lick. But there's little towns like this all through German towns, Czech towns. I mean, Polish towns. They're all over the place in Texas.
Yeah.
And it's probably been 20 or 30 years since I've heard that song, but man, it comes back like a rampaging memory.
So yeah, a couple things, because I know there's a book, I presumably written by one of his children, because there's a book that came out shortly after his death called Hondo, My Father.
Yep, that's by Becky. That's by the eldest daughter.
By the daughter. I can't tell you what the connection is, but the librarian, and I hope this is not sharing too much, at East Terrell Hills Elementary School, where I went, Um, the librarian's last name was Ruthruff, Ruthruff. She had some connection to Hondo, the Crouch family or something. My mother, as you know, was a bookseller. Somehow we acquired a signed copy of Hondo My Father, and on there's some assembly, and I it was a tragic introvert as a kid. But my mom gave me the signed copy of Hondo My Father. This is a gift for Mrs. Ruthruff. You have to give this to her. Like, oh, I was terrified of having to like be in front of people, but
Mhm.
I okay, I'll do it. And so presented a copy of Hondo My Father to her for her. I don't know what it was exactly, but I had to give her this book because she had some sort of connection to him. I wish I could figure out or recall now what it was. So, but I can picture that book because I think I had a copy of it for years as well.
It,
Um,
it,
Go ahead.
it goes for like $92 on Amazon now. So
Oh shoot, really? Because
yes.
it's not a very no, it's a fairly thin book really, and I'm pretty sure that Willie Nelson owns land. It's not on the map, but Willie Nelson's property that's out there, sort of between kind of on the way to Marble Falls, between Bee Cave
Mhm.
and Marble Falls.
Yeah.
He calls Luck, Texas, which is it's not an incorporated town, but he has land there. He parks his tour bus there. He must have there's a hunk of land there that is or was being developed into something. But I mean, I've known forever it's a ripoff of Lukenbach because he tells people when you're here you're in luck, and when you're not here, well, you're out of luck. Which is very much in the exact same spirit of Lukenbach, which is yeah,
Yes.
right, which is perfect. Anyway, yeah, Hondo
Well,
Crouch.
yeah, there was also I believe, there was a Crouch's department store in Llano, Texas, my mom's hometown. And I
Hmm.
don't know if that's any relation to any of the Crouches at all anyway. It was like a furniture store. I don't know how that's related to the Crouches. I'll ask
Hmm.
one of my uncles here if I can.
Yeah, very cool.
But yeah, a real influential dude. And this was back in the 70s when Texas music was a big thing, and all those voices we talked about were coming up, and Austin City Limits was still about kind of country and folk music. And
Right.
um, I remember, going to staying in small towns like that where the biggest excitement on a Friday night was going down to the community center and playing dominoes, and hearing my uncles and cousins, older cousins, having to drive a couple counties over because we lived in a dry county. Um, just it really kind of took me back to being a kid in the 70s and in the hill countries in Texas. So
Right.
there we go. A little potpourri of Texas
Yeah.
personalities there.
Yeah. Very cool. All right, folks. Yeah. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it. But please like, share, subscribe, steal your spouse's or your siblings' phone and subscribe them to our podcast too, or something, I guess. We appreciate you tagging along with us and sharing our stuff. Please give us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening, and give us 5 stars. That helps us out a ton. DreamIdiots.com, Facebook and Instagram, Dream Idiots. And have any other story ideas for us, please write us, dreamidiotspodcast@gmail.com. And thanks for tagging along.
Yes, indeed. Now go find Guy Clark's song "Let 'Em Roll." If you've never heard that, go listen to that song, and be good to each other. Thanks.
This is a Rough Tiger production.
Bong bong,
Mhm.
Bryan.
Bong bong?
Bong bong.
Bong bong. Good.